Lochani Masola Africa Woke, and welcome to our podcast called Are We Yet Uhuru? We are back again. Hashtag imibuzo engabuzekiko, the voice of the voiceless. Remember, this podcast is sponsored by Ijuba Nobkobe. So Ijuba Nobkobe. Ijuba Nobkobe is a very big company that produces cranberry gin and tonic that you see here in my table, and also sparkling wine nectar rosé. Ungazitholela yakho uledle udiche nabangani bakho nenhlobo zakho. Ungayithola kwa sinaso istolo online shop kwaJuba Nobkobe, which is www.ijubanobkobe.co.za. Ungayithola godu kwa macro online, bayadeliver babeke emnyango. Ungasithola kiwo wonke ama social media platforms, ibizo linye, one name, same name, Ijuba Nobkobe. Mzansi sibuyile godu. I am not alone today. You won't believe it. You won't believe who is in our studio today. I brought a very special guest for you. Wow. Masola Africa. Steve Biko is here. Boo, 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 boo. He is here, Steve Biko. Simtolile balaleli. Sila sinitshela ukuthi sizobe nifunela bona sibalethe la. Simtolile. Ngizokubiza ngoSteve Biko. Wena uzobatshela ukuthi ubani. All the way from wherever.
Yes.
Mr. Biko.
Yeah, well.
Can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Steve Biko is the tree. And the tree fell, as people know, in 1977. And Ngestosa, when a tree falls and something shoots out of that tree, a little plant, they call that Hlumelo. Wow. And then when they look at the act of sprouting is what it is. So when they look at you and they say, Hlumelo, that is the noun, the person that is sprouted out of the tree.
Wow.
So that is my name, Hlumelo Biko. I came from a very big tree. I was a very small little plant, and now I'm a grown man.
Mr. Hlumelo Biko, the biological son of our struggle icon, Steve Biko. Amanye bayazi ngesibhedlela sePitori bayibiza ngoSteve Biko. Umntwana wakhe lo lisokana lakhe, he is his son biologically. Simlethile balaleli, nizizwa njani lapho? Biza okude noseduze nazi indaba zifikile. This is the podcast called Are We Yet Uhuru? Yenza izinto zenzeke. #imibuzo engabuzekiko. Don't forget the voice of the voiceless. Mr. Hlumelo Biko, sikuthabele.
No, it's nice to be with you. Thank you for welcoming me, and I appreciate the invite.
Thank you so much. I'm sure even the viewers will clap their hands, will scream, will call each other what's up and whatsoever. Can you tell us about Mr. Hlumelo Biko? A little bit, yes.
Well, as you have rightly noted, we've got so many stories in our country. One of them, of course, is the story of my father, and people know it by now. Young man who graduated from Lovedale and had a dream to go and become a doctor. Had no idea he was going to be in politics, and was inspired by the Rivonia trial to say, even though we're young people, even though we're trying to be professionals, there's got to be a different way that we can contribute. He found a way of collecting like-minded people. People like my mother, people like Uncle Bani Pichana, who were contemporaries, and then many, many other people. I can't even mention all of them. There's more than 25 people that were gathered as students from a core group, and they began this thing called the Black Consciousness Movement. Mm-hmm. And it is in the context of that movement that many things happened in our country. between when they went to school around 67 and when, unfortunately, my father got killed 10 years later, around 77. And in between those 10 years, the country was shaken, and they've made their mark in society. Now, my father was killed in route from Cape Town coming back to the Eastern Cape, picked up by the police. Many people think that it was foreign intelligence that alerted them to the fact that there's a car that's carrying this man. So the roadblock that was waiting for him was very intentionally there. And they proceeded to put him in jail, and as people know, there was severe torture, and he fought back, and torture, and he fought back. And somewhere along the way, he lost his life. So he was a struggle veteran in word, in deed, and in writing. And it is from there that my mother was already pregnant when he was going through this trauma. And we have this interesting parallel, even though I've never met him. When he was in hospital, or in the car on his way to Pretoria, the police car, in the back of the police car, somewhere along the way he passed away. I then was inside my mother's stomach in September at this time, and I started to also miscarriage as a child. And my mother and I were being driven to Limpopo, to, at that time, what is now Polokwane, what was then Petersburg, to the hospital. So my mother arrived. She was assessed by the doctors, and they said she couldn't leave between then and when she gives birth, otherwise she'll lose the baby. And it was the next day that she learned that the love of her life has been killed. So from that day until I was born in January, we didn't leave the hospital, and then I was born. So I grew up for the first 6 years of my life in Limpopo.
Wow.
My mother was banished there because she got picked up by the cops several months before this event that I'm describing with my father. And then they put her in the furthest place, the hottest place they could find, and that's where they banished her to. So these are the circumstances under which many people were going through. They lost their parents. I'm not special in that regard. South Africa is a place where there's so many broken families that resulted either directly from apartheid or indirectly from the socio-economic environment. I read a statistic the other day that between 50 and 60% of households in South Africa have no father today. And so when we think about all these things that are going wrong in our society with crime and all this stuff, it started then, where men were being killed, men were being forced to go and become migrant laborers, men were being forced to go into exile. And so for those times, from the Rivonia trial until 1994, we were basically under siege as men and women in South Africa. And so the society that we live in today is in recovery mode from those times. And in all of that, I pay huge respect to the women that have held down pretty much most of South African households. Whether the husband is there, the boyfriend is there, we are a country that is raised on the back of black women. And so for me, from the beginning of life, directly my mother, but just in general, I have the highest respect for women and what they've done and how they've kept our country going. And so that's my origin story. I then, from Limpopo, we moved to Cape Town. My mother became a anthropologist. So she was a medical doctor. She decided to get a PhD in anthropology, and she began to become a researcher, and got a PhD, became a junior professor, and worked her way all the time, raising us, making sure we were well, and she eventually became the vice chancellor of the University of Cape Town. And so that placed me in Cape Town for that span of time. from roughly 82 until I finished my UCT degree. So I did an undergrad at UCT. And so I became politically active and socialized during the course of the transition to 94. And I must say we've come a long way from there. There's some good, but recently, as we'll discuss later, we've had some interesting reminders that the healing process hasn't been finished. And so I went overseas. When I graduated from UCT, I studied in the States. And then I came back immediately after finishing and began to work. And I had decided that I was going to make my contribution in business, and I thought that there was no real space for young people in the politics of that time. But living in this country, you can't escape. And my contribution has been through writing. I've written 5 books.
Wow.
I started my first book when I was 30. And I've written what I think is my last book, which I finished a couple of weeks ago. So that was the 5th and final one. And
don't save the final.
I think it's going to be the final because now I want to concentrate on doing. Because,
do you think it's enough for us as South Africans?
Yeah, there's a difference between research, reading, writing, and action. And I think in a person's life, you need to go through that period of contemplation, reflection, thinking, meditation, all that stuff. But you also have to act because we don't have an infinite amount of time on this earth. And we need to leave our mark in terms of the things that we have done. Yeah, and so I want to really focus on helping on the education side. We'll talk about what I've done until now there, but that's my focus going forward because I think there is a leveling factor that is education that's so key for our children, but also young adults and older people who can always learn. I mean, I don't think you ever stop learning until you leave Earth. Mm-mm. So my focus is on making a mark in that space. And we'll discuss the different initiatives that I've been involved in and I will be involved in going forward.
Wow. So you've been in Polokwane?
Yes, Kiabulela, Kivuleti, Zanin, but we've always gone back to where my maternal home is, which is in a place that is called 8 Cake, an Afrikaans name. On a river called Sinwabara, and that river is not far from where my grandfather made a home.
Where is that place?
And so it is, do you know a place called Bochum?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get to Bochum, which is already far from Polokwane, and you drive another 20 kilometers on a gravel road and you'll get there. So that's where 8 Cake is. And my maternal grandmother was a very, very strong woman. She married a principal. She was a teacher. So this love of education comes from them. And they had 8 children. Obviously...
this is your father's side?
My maternal grandmother and my maternal grandfather.
Okay.
And so, since we're talking about Polokwane, I'll start with them.
Yes.
And they raised these children. All of them went to tertiary, which is a real achievement. But she was very unlucky, let me say, in that shortly after her last child got born, her husband died. And so my maternal grandmother raised all these children by herself. And she was a comedian, a disciplinarian, a farmer, a teacher, all of these things that's symbolic of African women. And she had a subsistence farm operation. That's really how she managed to subsidize her teacher's salary in order to raise these kids. And they each have gone on to do interesting things. Many of them were teachers. Then there was the 2 girls. My mother's older sister's a nurse, and she was a doctor. So I think she accomplished what she wanted to accomplish.
Wow. So you keep on saying your mom. Can you tell our viewers Who is your mom?
My mother is Mampila Rampili, and so the maternal side are the Rampilis, who are a Limpopo-based clan, and very tightly knit. You'll see Rampilis are all somehow related.
Yes.
And Limpopo is an interesting place. Everybody's one or two cousins away from each other. So you have to wonder how things happened in the past. But they all tell the story about how they migrated to that part of the world. And so they're very proud people. Education is very important for them. And then my paternal grandmother was a very strong woman who, like many women in the Eastern Cape, had a tough life where she had to cater for her children, but also for extended family. And so she was a domestic worker. Her husband was in law enforcement in the village there, and then passed away when he was young, and she raised all of these children and cousins in the home that she still left for everybody. And so this was in Ginsberg, which is King Williamstown township. So my life growing up, I would think I went to Ginsberg the first time when I was 6 months, when my grandmother called me because they wanted to perform all of the rituals, the family rituals. And since that day, almost every December, we went back to the Eastern Cape. And, family survived for as long as that maternal grandmother or paternal grandmother is there.
Of course.
I was lucky because both have lived long. So they passed away later stages of life, and they became friends too. Again, my paternal grandmother, or Mam Kete as we call her, she was just a joy, a dignified person, church person, but very funny and very tough at the same
Comedian.
time. Yeah, so I think this is a coping mechanism that African women have, using humor as a way to survive situations.
Yes, of course.
Humor is a very important part of both sides of my family, and we laugh at ourselves, we laugh at each other, and we laugh at the world. And I think that's what kept us from not taking ourselves too seriously or, becoming worried about our own personal situations in life. When you've grown up where there was pain right in the beginning, I think you learn to cope with life in a different way. And so, so that's the family history.
Wow. So, if we may ask, how does it feel to be the son of Dr. Mampele Rampele and Steve Biko?
Well, it's a hard question to answer because I haven't been anyone else's child. I've only had these two parents from the beginning. But I'll tell you, my mother actually protected me so much from the understanding of how big this legacy thing is. So I grew up feeling very ordinary and addressing and dealing with friends as equals and peers, and never thought for a second that there was something special. Until I went to the US, I think it was around 88. I was lucky enough to go there, and I realized there's T-shirts, there's hats, and there's, my last name is on these T-shirts and hats. And then I started to think, okay, fine, this thing might be a big deal to other people. But by then, it was already normalized, right? So we grew up very ordinary. Obviously, we were very poor for many years, but comparatively to people that were living next to, my mother was a doctor, so she earned a decent salary. But when I look back now, in my mind, the house that I was born in was massive. And I thought everything was large. Then I saw a picture when I was 3 or something like that. And I was like, wait a minute, this place, maybe it was a 3-4 room, but I think it was tiny house. But it felt very homely, and it felt abundant, And I think for me, that first 6 years growing up in a village called Lineage, which is outside of Tzaneen, was the best because, you know, village life is one where all doors are open for you, all children are the same, and if you end up in a neighbor or down the road, you get treated like you're a child in that place.
Exactly.
So we really grew up feeling like the whole place is ours. And we didn't know what we didn't have. We just focused on, we had trees with mangoes and pawpaws and lychees.
Of course.
This was,
You're busy with that.
it made us feel very rich. And so, that was my upbringing. And then, of course, coming to Cape Town, I had to adjust from village life to township life because we were welcomed into a township called Langa. And we were living actually in a church house. My mother's friend was a priest, and his wife was her friend. So the two of them, the Muletsani family, were kind enough to let us into their house, and we made ourselves at home for 6 months until we found our own home in Guguletu. And so Guguletu then became home, but it was a very sharp adjustment from village life because now all of a sudden you're not allowed to just walk anywhere, you know. You have to always, parents had to know where you were, and you had to be careful crossing roads and all of that stuff.
It's
that
a township.
comes with a big township life, yeah. And fortunately or unfortunately, I was living not far from the graveyard on a street called NY 108. Funny enough, that street has now been named Steve Biko Street, and it had nothing to do with us. We had long left by the time they just chose to name it. But
What?
every single time there was a funeral of a struggle veteran or a young person that had died because they were protesting, the procession marched right past our house. And you know how those processions work. As it gets closer to the graveyard, people are more worked up. And so very often towards our house there was a time when the cops would try and stop them and slow them down or quiet them down, and then there was a fight. And, you know, the normal thing at that time, rubber bullets and all of that. So we kind of became really aware that living and burying people and all of those things was a contested thing. It wasn't the ordinary thing where you get to go and bury your loved ones without a fight. And I think I say good and bad because it was a useful thing as a child to see that this thing called a struggle is a real life thing that is day to day in people's lives. And you get to witness somebody that has died and their family that is mourning and the police that is oppressing them all at once. And that visual I'll never forget because it really dawned on me that these things were barbaric and crude and brutal, but at the same time there was beauty in the way people tried to take back their dignity from their attempts to muzzle them and stop them from having a personal experience with the people that they were trying to say goodbye to. So yeah, so that was a rude awakening growing up in Cooks. And then we were lucky enough because my mother became a professor, and as you got closer to 1990, 1991, that allowed then for the university to either rent or buy a house for black people. This was the first time we got to live in, you know, a suburb, even though it was not the best suburb, but it was a suburb. And
Those days.
we got to go to decent schools from then and all of that stuff. But the enduring feeling that I got from that experience, I learned something that I'll never forget, which is that whether in a village or a township or a suburb, on average, talent is just naturally dispersed. So if you take 20 people from the village that I was born in, and 20 people from Guguletu, and 20 people from Mowbray, which is the suburb that I moved to, that sample you'll find an equal number of smart people, equal number of honest people, equal number of crooked people, equal number of stupid people. It's not because you live in one place that you become stupid or you become smart. And that lesson never left me, because I think it is a fundamental truth that beneficiaries of apartheid choose to believe that intelligence has something to do with wealth. They forget that if you look back, what started apartheid? A report in 1936 called the Poor White Problem. Mm-hmm. And this report was done by Carnegie, which is an American institute. And they came to study why were white Afrikaners in particular, but some white English people, struggling. Why were they poor? So they created this thing, the Poor White Problem, and then they wrote the report, they published the report, and then the South African government at the time took this report and embraced it to say we need to do something about this poor white problem. Right? I raise this issue because at the time, the reason for that report was, remember that, to go a little bit further, there was a hut tax, right, in the late 1800s, which was forcing black people to go and get jobs so that they could pay the tax. The reason the hut tax was there is because we were subsistence farming, we didn't need jobs. Everybody had a farm, you had land, you could create your own food, you could create your own livelihood. And so as much as white people wanted us to work for them, they couldn't force us because we didn't need them. So because of that, they created this hut tax. And because of the hut tax, then we needed to get jobs. So this whole thing of employment started because of a decree. You understand? And it wasn't done by mistake, it was done on purpose. To say these people here, they don't know that they need us, so we need to force them into a different line, which is called employment. So when that happened, there was also missionary schools, as we all know. But then the basic level of education wasn't bad. So black people got educated, black people got into professions, and black people were outperforming white people. Hence, the poor white problem. You understand? So we had these two sides of our income. There were people that were working, and there were also people that were still continuing to farm, just like my grandmother did.
Yes.
And because of that, there was not a lot of abject poverty amongst black people. And there was because people took their profession seriously, there was a degree of excellence there. So when you think about that time, around that 1936 time, the Mandelas had law firms, there were accountants, do you understand?
I was asking myself, yeah.
So the source of Afrikaner people's problems was they were oppressed by the English in the 1800s. Then when they got custodianship of South Africa from the Queen and began this Republic of South Africa, they thought things would just miraculously be fixed. Just like we did in 94. We thought things would just be fixed. They learned just like we did that more than 30 years after they got this country, they were still poor. So then they started the process that would lead to apartheid. So I'd like to correct people that apartheid wasn't anything to do with white people hating us or white people thinking they're better than us. It was actually the opposite. After we got put into the professional scene, into jobs and whatever it is, they realized that we can perform those jobs just as well or better than them. And so they couldn't manipulate the competition until they introduced apartheid laws. So when you look at the sequence of the laws, those laws were not just about separate development. Those laws were actually white empowerment laws that were there to begin the process of boosting the average lifestyle of white people. And so when apartheid started, the first thing they were focused on was education. So if you look from the total tax base of the country, the apartheid government spent 4 times on each white child versus each black child. 4 times. Yes. So if you think about that, starting in the late 40s until 1994, that's many, many years of systematic favoring of one type of education versus another. Similarly with infrastructure. So all of the infrastructure from the national tax base was focused in the areas where they lived. And we were obviously banished now into these new things called townships. And so these things called suburbs were the result of white empowerment again, utilizing our tax money. So when they say we're paying your tax, we're like a few people paying all the taxes in South Africa, it was the opposite. We were paying taxes like anybody else, but we were not getting the benefits. We were getting at least a quarter of what we should get. But on infrastructure, it was much less. So the development of South Africa was systematically unequal. And the segregation wasn't about we hate this group. No, the segregation was we want more of state resources for us. It was an economic and a power thing. The hatred and all the other things come second as a justification.
Focus on the
But they
economy.
made their minds up that they want more. And they want to systematically favor their children over us. So that is the background of why apartheid started. So when you look at the different phases of the fight against apartheid, we were fighting specific things, past laws, we were fighting being taught in Afrikaans versus being taught in our own languages. But systematically, each one of those fights was threatening economic advantages that white people couldn't allow. And so the fight back was to not just keep the Dompa system or keep Afrikaans, it was also to say, if we give you this, you're going to be asking for more. So we're fighting like our lives depend on it. And of course, they had guns, they had all of these things that they were given by Israel and America, who were the two big funders, alongside Britain, of the apartheid regime. Before any sanctions, these people were funding their colony in this country to be more advanced in favor of white people versus us. And this happened over 40 years, 50 years. So that's why it's important to understand what and why apartheid, what allowed apartheid to come into being, and why it was put together the way it was. And so Verwoerd was a PhD in basically propaganda. And he learned from the US system. He went to go and study the laws there called Jim Crow laws, which taught Verwoerd how to manipulate a mind of an indigenous person. And then from that understanding, he went to design an education system for us.
South Africans.
For black South Africans, not for South Africans in general.
Black South Africans.
Black South Africans. And that system was meant to make you, over a period of time, indoctrinated into working for the white man. You understand? And so they were breeding conformist behavior from black people. So that was the general public school education system. That's what most people got. In and amongst that, obviously, you get taught the things that you need to learn in order to become a worker. That was education. Then those people that were lucky, or quote unquote, to get into missionary schools, were given a broader education as a future leader of black society. So they received more knowledge, they received more access to a broader range of knowledge. But they were also being picked from families that were relatively well off. So they were trying to create a new class of black people. Do you understand? So that was the purpose of missionary education. Okay. And in there, they were teaching, as we still unfortunately perpetuate, that this school is an education system that is sponsored by a Christian institution. Christianity is a religion of a white Jesus, Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
even though that wasn't true, but that's what they taught people.
Yes.
And so they had the image, they had this white Jesus on the wall.
Yes.
They had the image of a redacted Bible, because it wasn't the whole Bible we were allowed to have access to. It was, picked apart so that they could emphasize certain parts and de-emphasize other parts. They turn your cheek, and that's what they wanted. It's the Christian that is subservient because of a belief that there's an afterlife where things will be equal, but today I must just live with the way things are. And so the type of Christianity that they were teaching wasn't actually the Christianity that we can read in the Bible, which was very different. And so my father was a curious person. So he went to this Catholic school and started asking questions about, so this Son of Man thing, when Jesus says he's Son of Man,
Yes.
how does this relate to the way you're teaching me about him? You understand? And questioning, was Jesus white or black? How can it be? He's from Palestine. It was hot, different environment. I don't see any white Palestinians. Where's this man from? And so,
Where is this man from?
it's through these questionings that he then came to the view that the education system is censored to create a type of person.
Yes.
And so he dedicated his life to reading outside of what they were supposed to read. Remember now, when my father graduated from Matric,
Yeah.
it was at the height of the Black Power movement in the US. So what was happening in the US is that black people were trying to get their own freedom, and the civil rights movement had begun to become very radical. So he was reading the radical and listening to the radical content of that movement. And that's what informed his understanding of what he thought was needed at the time. So coming into first year of medicine, his mind was already made up that actually these people in the US are young people like us. They are able to speak against the system, write against the system, and mobilize on that basis of truth. And alert people to the fact that they were being lied to in church, they were being lied to at work, they were being lied to about who they were, and the education system was a lie in the US and here. So that's what informed the beginnings of black consciousness. And so he went to Lovedale with a man named Bani Pijana, and the two of them got together, and Bani was a prolific writer. Became, he was interested in the legal fraternity and also interested in church. And the two of them were the initial founders of Black Consciousness. And it's in the engagements with each other and the readings and all of these things that they were doing to try and understand what message to start with in this country. That's where this radical ideology came out of. And he was in an environment where the ANC had been banished. So ordinarily, somebody like him would just automatically be an ANC person. But that ANC had been put underground, created a gap for people. So there was this vacuum from Rivonia trial to when they started speaking about black consciousness. And so history had just made this perfect moment for somebody like him. And so what they did is they started where they were with fellow students from all around the country and engaged them to organize themselves into chapters in these universities. And that's where the movement caught fire. And so it just happened to be the smartest people in the country that were radicalized by this core message. And the message was perfect for the moment. And that's why black consciousness had such a big effect. And in the beginning, the apartheid government actually was quite happy that this thing was happening because they thought black people had finally realized that they should be living separately from us in the home states. They thought we were saying black consciousness because we want to live in the home states. And so they actually didn't care much about this because they misunderstood what the message was in the beginning. And so it's only when my father and the colleagues were talking against people like Gacha Buthelezi to say, no, we can't have a homestead. This is our country. Why would we want a small part within the whole thing, which is our country? And that's what then created the first insight from white people that this is a dangerous thing. By then, these guys had found their voice, they had become organized, and so now it was a very difficult movement to stop because
they are far.
Yeah, they were far, and they were very quick to set up organizational structure. So they had the student movement, they had a grassroots movement to go and do the things that they were preaching in townships, in rural areas. So they were talking about programs. Right? And so they started these programs where they created creches, they created clinics. So that was an attitude that said you can't just theoretically protest against a society. You have to actually go and do something that is the exact opposite from what the apartheid government wants you to do, which is to build individual institutions for black people that are independent of the system.
To accommodate them.
Yeah. And not just accommodate them, but inspire black people to be independent. Because if you understand apartheid, the whole thing was to try and convince you that without white people, you're nothing. That is the nature of the Favut education system. They stop you from problem-solving skills, so they don't encourage problem-solving skills to be taught. And what they want you to do is memorize this information, regurgitate it. That's why our system of education is like that.
Bantu education.
Yeah, so you learn, you regurgitate, but you don't get encouraged by your teachers to go outside of this particular set of topics. And this topic is in preparation for you working for them. So my father and his colleagues said, no, this is completely opposite of African culture. So if you recall, you talk about the Bantu. No? My father's middle name is Bantu.
Yes, I know.
And this thing of Bantu education, it wasn't named like that by accident. So the core of our belief before white people got to us, this is now pre-Van Riebeck and all of that nonsense, was that we identified as Bantu. This was a central identity. Not because it means what people think it means today, which is in reference to a tribe, a clan, or whatever. If you break down that word, Ba is just a collective. Ndu is the most important part of that word. So if you see it written properly, the N before Ndu is a capital N.
Yeah.
It's to emphasize that word, right? And that word is, it's such a difficult word for people to understand until they break down what our culture is. So we are people of the spirit. Ndu is the total universal spirit.
Wow.
So in Zulu, we've got a different way of saying it. Ne? In that language, what they emphasize is it's now bastardized as Nkulunkulu. But that's not what that word was originally. Originally, it was Umkulu, Omkulu. Now, Umkulu, what is Umkulu? It is the sum total of all ancestors. Spirit. Ne? So it's the same thing. So Omkulu is to emphasize it's every spirit. So Umkulu, Omkulu. You understand? Then, so those were the two ways that we expressed our belief system. And many other ways, like Sonini Nanini, which is a Xhosa way of describing who God is. You take Sonini Nanini, and what does it mean? It means the God that is, will be, and was at any time.
Sonini nanini.
Yes.
Gusonini nanini.
Nanini.
Yes, at any time.
Yes. Now here's the interesting thing. Ne? That word nini, N-I-N-I.
Yes.
If you go back to the first Hebrew Bible to look at how they write God, in Hebrew, original Hebrew, it's written N-I-N-I. Now, if you ask me, I can explain to you why that connection is there.
Why? Singena piscos alap.
This is an interesting question. You should be asking the other way around. Singing up is Hebrew.
It's okay, Singena.
So the truth is, and now we have to go on to spirituality. My father had a side of black consciousness called black theology. And of course, they hadn't had the tools that we've got in modern times to do the research and find out all of these things about the origins of Christianity. But they had an intuition that this religion isn't being taught the way it should be. And the more they dug into it, the more they realized, no, this thing seems more like ours than theirs. So black theology was a movement amongst pastors to reclaim Christianity and reconnect it with Africa. A lot of people don't know about this because you have to go back to the origins of black consciousness and study the movement and how it grew. It was in every aspect of society. There was an economic version, there was a theological version, there was a political version, there was a programmatic version. So this thing was endemic throughout society. And it was happening at the time when the ANC was absent from society, so it wasn't documented after apartheid. You understand? So it was lost.
After?
1994, we didn't study black consciousness, which we should. Because if we had studied it, then each one of these manifestations of black consciousness would have been understood. I'm just going to talk about the one, the theology one, just so that you can understand the depth. So, when we are told about history, you can Google it yourself, to the audience and yourself. We are told that 22,000 years ago, the most numerous population group were what people say now are Khoisan.
Yes.
They were
true.
the majority of the world's population. Right? This is in every book, so it's not a thing that people can argue about. However, no one stops to explain what happened to the Khoisan. Why are there only 100,000 now if they were the most populous people in 22,000 years ago? Nature doesn't work like that. If you were the most popular at that time, population at that time, you should be still around that 50% mark, unless you can argue that there was a genocide or whatever it is. The truth is that there is no such thing as Khoisan. Even this invention of Nguni, it's a language invention, not a ethnic invention. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yeah.
True.
So Nguni is more referring to a language group than a people. Right. What are the Khoisan? The Khoisan were actually called the Kwe Tam. So it's written with an H or without an H. In the olden days, I'm talking like really far ago, it was Kwe Tam. This is every person of black heritage. That's what those people were. That's why we were the most numerous 22,000 years ago.
Yes.
We didn't have San, we didn't have Khoi, we didn't have Xhosa, Zulu. We as a group were Kwe Tam people, which spoke dialects of a singular language that comes from a long, long time ago. You understand?
Yes.
Right. So I tell you this because you need to believe that in order to understand what happened with civilization around the world.
Yes.
We left here, Southern Africa. So don't let people tell you we came here from Ghana and DRC and all these things. This might be true, but it doesn't tell the whole picture. We left here, we were here. Why? Cradle of humankind is where? It's in Joburg, right?
It's here.
What is the cradle of humankind? It's the place where they found the most human skeletons and the oldest ones, the most of the oldest ones. Let's put it that way, which shows you that the majority of humans in those times were
Where?
here.
Yeah.
Correct. So and this was now, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years. So we are local people, okay? We migrated at a very specific time for a very specific reason.
Okay.
That migration was because there was a big drought in this part of the world. So the entire Southern Africa had a massive drought around 19,000 years ago. Massive. So as our people were migrating, looking for land for them and their cattle and sheep and goats and whatever, they kept going further and further north. And they arrived northeast Africa at the source of the Nile, what is now Uganda and DRC, the north part of Uganda and DRC.
Yes.
There's a set of mountains there called the Zenzero Mountains.
I heard about it.
Yes. How do I know this? They've now found that farming in that time began then. Before all other parts of the world were farming, there was this spontaneous spike in farming 18,000 years ago in those mountains. So our people became home there. So that place from there until modern day Egypt, that was our new home. Okay? In that time it was called Kush, or it was called Sudan, or it was called, you know what I mean? There are different names.
Yes.
Ethiopia, whatever you want to call it. But that was home for us at that time because of a drought. 1,000 years later, there was a massive flood in that same place.
No more drought now.
And that drought started from the Mediterranean basin, and it affected the whole region there, and it affected the region which is now called Iraq and Iran.
Yes.
So those two stories are the first stories in the Bible. What are those stories? About a drought. How do I know? Because if you read the Bible, it tells you that Cain
And
Abel fought, Cain killed,
Abel.
and God then made the land so that it couldn't be planted.
Producible.
That's how our people told the story about the drought. And then you read, several generations later, there is a flood. Okay? So I'm going to come to the Kwe Club now. I'm just giving you some background. So how do we know where the flood took place? The Bible says it took place near the land of Nod. Now, Nod, N-O-D, it's a Hebrew word that means a land of the wandering people.
Okay.
Yes. What do they call the Kwe Club? Bushmen.
Yes.
And the thing in our mind is about Bushmen is they wander around.
Yes. Wandering around.
Yes. In Arabia, they have this word called Bedouin. It means exactly the same thing as Bushmen. So, Nod is a landmass which is in between East Africa and Palestine. It's that whole area. Yeah.
Wow.
Which was described in the Bible as east of Eden. Yeah. This is now, you can go Genesis, first 4 paragraphs you read.
Exactly.
Right.
That's what I'm like.
We were writing a story of our migration, a drought,
A flood.
And this thing of wandering around until we found
The place.
Yes. In the Bible, it tells you that's when the Lord's name was first pronounced. Okay? The reason why I bring that up, these Kwe Club people, the wandering people, are the first people to say the name that became Jehovah.
Wow.
How did they say this name? So, this is where I'm going back to the word Nini. And so
Nini.
Nini na Nini.
Yes.
What is Jehovah? So a lot of people, when they read the Bible, it has different ways of describing what that original name was. But recently, they have come down to, and this is Jewish scholars, have come down to saying, no, the actual, it was a Hebrew version of Jehovah.
The Nini.
No, yeah, we'll get there. But the first way of saying God's name was a Hebrew version of Jehovah.
Yeah.
It's Yehovah.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Which is actually Jehovah.
Yeah, their language.
Which is actually written as N-I-N-I. Okay. Yes. And what does it mean? It means the God who was, the God who is, and the God who will be. Which
my
is
God.
So Nini
Nanini.
There we go.
He was there before.
Yes.
He's still here.
Yes, and
He's
he
going to
will
be
be
there.
Exactly.
He's still,
Yes.
my God.
Then I'll give you a couple of others before we switch topics. The word Almighty. What does it mean? Somandla.
I think there's a song
Yes.
following
That's
those words exactly
Yes,
as they
yes.
are.
So the first version of the Hebrew language was our language. Remember that this was now Abraham's time. We're talking 1800 BCE.
Yes.
Yes. So this is around then that we are now documenting our beliefs. The story of Moses leaving Egypt, where does he go? Land of the wandering people.
Canaan.
No, not Canaan. If you read the Bible, where does he go? He goes to a man called Jethro.
Yes, true. I
And
agree.
Jethro lived in a place called Midian. It's written in the Bible.
Comedian.
Midian is not in Canaan, it's in Arabia.
Wow.
The same place that the Bible says is the land of the wandering people.
Exactly the same.
Nod, yes. That's where Midian was. So that's the place where people first spoke God's name. Moses gets there. Remember, he's running away from the issues there in Egypt.
Yeah.
He gets married. Remember?
Yes.
And spends 40 years there. Right?
Yes, I remember.
That's when he was now taught religion by our people. Or Jethro.
They.
Midian.
Comedian.
Exactly. This place next door, I'll give you an example. The place next door is called Edom. It's just north of Midian.
But Moses was driven by God to go there.
Yes.
So, what's happening there?
Not knowing the name of God doesn't mean there's no God.
Spiritually.
Spiritually. God exists everywhere, right? But
Wow.
we go there to go and learn the faith. This thing that's become Judaism and Christianity, we taught Moses. Moses goes to write it. Moses leaves that place. Moses goes to Canaan
The
and
spirit.
all those places. And that is the story of how Christianity and Judaism came out of where we were into the rest of the world. Important because we were told by the apartheid system we were non-believers. That's the name kafir. That's where it comes from. It's an Arab expression of non-belief. That you are a non-believer, that's why you're kafir.
You're not
They
Christian.
actually called it kafir, that's how they pronounce it. But then Afrikaners being brutal people, they just pronounce it kafir.
Just like that.
Yes.
Yes.
Not just you're not Christian, but you don't believe in anything.
In anything.
That's what
You
it means.
don't believe, you don't have faith, you just
That's what it
a
means.
person.
You're a faithless person. But they use that word to describe people who invented the very Bible that they were coming to us with. This is the great irony. So we are invaded on the basis that we are non-believers. We are colonized on the basis that we're non-believers. The justification for that is the Bible that we wrote. No? And we get brutalized in the name of this Bible that we've written. Because we don't believe in anything.
That Bible.
And they teach you for 40 years until you start to believe that that's true. So when you look at that white version of Jesus, all the things that say, that person and his people taught me how to believe because I didn't believe. That's the
It's
mental
in our
enslavement
mind.
that's really,
Yes, yes.
more than any other law, that's at the core of what's happened to us. You understand?
Wow.
Yes. And so even this word kafir doesn't apply to us at all. It actually applies to them, not us.
Tell us.
So, who are the people that came here? Abu van Riebeeck, if he existed.
From there to here.
There were people that came from the Netherlands, but these were prisoners. These were crooks that the government wanted them to leave. So they put them on a ship. They financed the captain of the ship to say, if you find something, tell us. And then you can keep X amount, the rest is ours. That was...
Oh, they were just sent.
They were sent. And you don't send your best people.
Yes.
You send those ones that you can afford to lose.
Yes.
That's the guys that came here.
So
these were themselves kafirs, non-believers. So they come here and they find Kweklam people living here, who they call Khoisan. Then they make differentiations between us. They say, well, this one looks like this one is Khoi. This one looks like this one is San. This one looks like this.
Basipha magama manje.
Basipha magama. Now, some of those words were words we used in our languages, but in a context they didn't understand.
Psychologically?
No, just generally. Remember, they were learning about us through interpreters.
Yes, I remember.
They could only catch every second, third, fourth word.
Yes, yes.
So because they were writing our history, because all history is written by them, they are able to tell us things that we have no idea whether it's true or not. You understand?
Yes.
But you tell people something for long enough in a structured way, they start to
believe.
You tell them they have no belief system until you arrive. The fact that is undisputable is we were not materialistic at this time, which is why they could give you beads and you say to them, oh, good, thanks for bringing me beads, then I'm going to be hospitable to you. You can make your home here.
Stay here because of the beads.
But when we say stay here, you're saying stay here in my home. We're being hospitable. We're not giving away land.
I'm not saying take my house.
No, because we don't even have that
It's just a hospitality.
We don't have the thing of ownership. We don't know such a thing. Yeah. So we had usage rights that were distributed through chiefs and through, senior people in communities. But they had the right to use, not the right to say, hey, Ami. Exactly.
He gave me a place to stay.
Exactly. And you were a custodian of this place until you passed away, then your kids can be custodians. But it doesn't mean that it's on a balance sheet.
Owning. Yes.
It's yours. Yeah. So for them, they looked at the situation and observed. They tested us. They take 2 or 3 cattle. Do we fight? Do we not fight? Oh, then they understood the behavior pattern. Yes.
I see.
And it took many years for them to officially then make these claims. We just don't know in reality when it started, when it didn't start. We can read some things from the history that they wrote, but I don't believe we know the whole story. What we know for sure is that at some point, black people realized these guys don't have good intentions. And that's when the first battle started. In fact, this clan that I'm from, of the Kweklam called the Xhosas,
yes,
they were a battalion of fighters, not a name of a people. Do you understand? So within every nation, there are people that are sent to fight. There are people. So we are named. It's like an English person being named an army. So you are from the army tribe.
Yeah.
That is what it is to be Xhosa. Do you understand?
What?
Yes. Do you understand? And think about the name Amazulu, people of the heavens. That's what it means.
Yeah.
It's not a tribe. It's a term that became a tribe because they told us it's a tribe. So the categorization that we've grown used to, it's outside looking into us and making smaller and smaller groups of what were just Kweklam people. Do you understand? So that now they can tell you, no, you're not from here. When are you from this place?
You belong there.
You belong there. Meanwhile, there's no truth to that. So if you look back at history, I want to just finish my story how did we get from Northeast Africa back? When people started fighting about religion, It happened, right? So the Romans, I'll explain something about white people later, but the Romans were fighting the Greeks, they were fighting the Arabs, and all of this created an environment between 500 BC and after, I'd say, Common Era or Christ, or whichever one you want to call it, from year one until now. People then decided they want to move back to where their homeland was. And that's when people moved to Central Africa, to Southern Africa. Because kubi la phezulu. Remember, there's this lovely phrase, kubi pa?
Yes,
that's what we said.
Yes.
Kubi pa. And we decided to come back. And that's how...
That's we use that terminology, but
so,
abantu understand which
exactly.
actually is coming from here.
So Southern Africa became repopulated by its own people. Do you understand? So when white people came here and found us here and found some people coming back, some people living here, they then said, these ones are from here and these ones are called this, these ones are called that. So Tina, we're believing a story from a stranger that's observing people at home. Do you understand? And we've based our whole identities on these stories. That you guys, Zulus, we traditionally don't like, Xhosas, we traditionally don't. Nonsense.
Nonsense.
So if you do DNA tests, there's every tribe in every part of South Africa has some representation.
Same gene, yes.
So there is no way that you can know that this person is from Orange Free State. It's nonsense.
No, you can't.
Yes. So that's why you find closer people in Orange Free State, you find them in Botswana, you find them in KZN, you find Zulu people. It's just a thing that's become reality because we conform to it. After a while, something becomes real when you believe it, and enough people believe it. So that's the story of how we became non-believing people who are non-South Africans, essentially. That's how the story is told now, if you listen carefully. The story is told that there are these people called the Khoisan, these are indigenous people. The rest of them are people that came just like us, i.e. the Afrikaners. That's how they tell the story. So we came same time, so whose home is it really? We're all kind of settlers.
Yeah, we are all coming from somewhere.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
So
Tina, we are people
here.
that have been here for hundreds of thousands of years.
They came as prisoners, as whatever,
exactly.
to go find something for yourself. If you find something there,
it's yours.
It's yours.
That's
but
right.
You remember that 70% is ours.
Yes. That's the context with.
By then, our people don't know. They came here as.
They were the lowest class people in the Netherlands.
But when they
came
get
here and they over time
there.
Have created a class structure for themselves.
Yes.
And this thing of apartheid was the final part of creating that class structure. Because you can't claim to be upper class or privileged people when you are doing less well than those ones that you think are non-believers. Which brings me back to that poor white problem, 1936. Do you understand now?
Poor. Yes.
There's only a problem because they were. It's not us that made them poor. They were just poor. They
were
couldn't
poor.
compete under the normal circumstances. So they had to create laws that force us not to be able to compete with them.
And they had to take our own.
And they had to take our land. They had to take this and confine us to certain spaces. And everything that they took was to make themselves richer. It wasn't random. On both sides of my family, we had land taken away from us, only because that particular land was rich. The soil was rich. It was close to water.
Yeah.
They didn't just take J&J.
They check.
They took the best that they could find because they knew the yields were good. So they moved you from there. They pushed you here. You then live in an arid, or what they thought is an arid place. We knew how to find water. That's a skill that
we have.
Wekam people have inherently that we've always had.
Long time ago.
So wherever we went, we found water. But for them, they needed the land to already be a certain way. The soil must be rich. And
they wait for the land to show itself that I can do this.
Correct. And so even the truth of farming, black people don't know that we taught these people how to farm. They'd never farmed. Where do prisoners learn to farm? They'd never farmed. right? So they came
They were
here.
in prison.
They were in prison, and there were people that were maybe from
What
very
else?
poor family.
Yeah.
So they come here, they learned how to farm from local people. Kweklam people taught them how to farm.
Bafika lapha bekilihla ukuthi benza kanje benza kanje
Exactly.
benza kanje.
And until when apartheid started, if you had to compare around the country, there was no distinction that made you believe that they were better farmers than us. There's no such thing. They became, quote unquote, better farmers because they took all the good land and they farmed at scale.
Where they can produce everything.
And they took national funds to invest in their farms.
How do they took national funds?
That's what apartheid did. It created a state which was controlled by them to put money into their neighborhoods.
Hard tax.
Yes. Hard tax, but all other tax, even after now, remember the hard tax was to force you to work. But look at the way apartheid regulation promulgated new taxes. So all those new taxes were there to raise money so that they could fund their neighborhoods, their kids, and we paid for it, their infrastructure. So this thing about Abelunga are better than us, it's an observation that comes after years and years of them trying to catch up and using our money to catch up.
Wow. Babukeli Makaya, I'm speechless. I have no words. This is the podcast called Are We Yet Uhuru? Sihlala sinitshela ukuthi sizonilethela zona, sizonilethela bona. Nangu namhlanje Mr. Hlumelo Biko, aka Steve Biko. Ngikutshelile ngathi bizo okude neseduze. Nazi indaba ziyachisa zimaporotlo, zimabhombo ngesikhethu. Wow. Mr. Biko, before we continue, let me remind our viewers that we are sponsored by the company called Ijuba Nobukhobe. Ijuba Nobukhobe is a company that produces cranberry gin and tonic and also sparkling wine, Nectar Rosé. You can find this brand at Macro Online. They deliver emnyango kwakho. You can also find this brand in our online store, which is www.ijubanobukhobe.co.za. You can also view us on all our social media platforms. Any social media that you know, just type Ijuba Nobukhobe. Igama liyafana, I'll change. #imibuzo engabuzekiko, the voice of the voiceless. Ziyachisa. Mr. Hlumelo Biko, aka Steve Biko. I always remind them who you are. The son of Dr. Mampele Rampele. We once saw her in the parliament. Sinilethela abantu abakhulu la. Niyasikolota maSewula Africa. The things you taught us today, it's a wow.
Thank you very much.
Wow. Hopefully when we buy those books, we're going to get more than this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's more information than ever before about the things that we've been speaking about. What's happened is that we've been systematically programmed against reading. And I'm not talking about something that I can't prove. You look at the average child now, their attention span is much shorter. Why? Because we watch screens, we spend our time YouTube, TikTok. So as you consume clips, you lose the ability to watch a whole movie, or you lose the ability to focus on documentaries. The way we consume reading material is also tweets, which are a certain number of characters, so they're short. So then you lose your ability to read a book. And so that's where our challenges are. It's not that there isn't that information, it's to go and find it. Now, we're talking about the past, and we wanted to get to 1994 and how we got to where we are today.
But before we go there, you said your mom was banished.
Yes.
What was happening there?
So remember that in the old days, you had three options. They either killed you, they imprisoned you, or they banished you, which is like house arrest. Umamwini had a type of banishing order that was the same as my mother's. It was exactly the same. So they isolate you away from family, away from your struggle comrades. And they restrict your movements, they restrict your ability to work, all of those things, so that they can take you out of the struggle.
Society.
Yes. And so either one of those three things was always on the table as a method of dealing with smart black people who were fighting back.
When's in?
No, she was part of the Black Consciousness movement. Remember, my mother was there from day one in the movement.
Okay.
And so when they were building clinics, she was there. She was running those clinics because she was a full medical doctor by that time.
Yes.
Baba, they got kicked out of medical school, so he never became a doctor. He was banished to Ginsberg from Durban. They kicked him out. You understand? Okay. And so you had a destabilization of people so that they could stop their activities. But because these guys had built such a powerful movement, you couldn't kill everybody. You got rid of one, then there was somebody, and they were structured, they were organized.
Yeah.
I remember
they know what they were doing.
They knew what they were doing. So because you couldn't speak in public, for instance,
yeah,
they would have a soccer game, but no one's cheering. Why? Because the loudspeaker is blaring a speech that he was giving, and he was in the stadium, but they didn't know where he was.
Oh, nice.
And that's how they would communicate with people. So there are so many different tools to try and get away from the restrictions on their movement, and obviously to try and stay alive and stay out of jail. And the way they were put in jail was through these apartheid laws about dom passes and all that stuff, which we know.
And then you mentioned that your father was tortured. Do you know how?
Yeah, it was a fight. It wasn't just torture. I mean, they were trying to hit him. My father was a very strong man. He was about this much taller than me, and he was strong. And so he was
a boxer.
Known for fighting. He could fight, and so when they hit him, he'd hit back, and you take 2, 3. But in this case, they brought in a whole bunch of them. I actually went to the room where they killed him.
I wanted to ask you
that. It was in
that.
Port Elizabeth, and it was a place where they so-called interrogated. It was really completely up to their discretion what they did to you in those rooms. And because
you went to the room?
Yeah, not that long ago, 3, 4 years ago I went.
Which room is that?
It's in Port Elizabeth. It's a prison, and it's a prison cell where they were doing interrogation. So it's now, people can go and visit and see what they were doing. And it's not just him. There were many people that were killed in that room, and others that were tortured with electrical equipment and all those things.
You said it's where?
In Port Elizabeth.
Okay.
Ekabeg.
So you know this cell your father was in?
Yes, I know.
You know, it's the same cell that he passed on?
Either between there and the back of the car where they threw him after that. Wow. So we don't know exactly when it happened. But the damage happened in that cell.
Okay. Did they bury him?
No. They put him in the back of a cell, and they drove him to Pretoria because they wanted to avoid people finding out how he died.
Okay. So
in fact, some time ago, I met with Ubabu Tokyo Sekhwale, and he described, he was in the prison in Pretoria, and something happened that morning when they brought my father's body. Ouch. And they found out that something was amiss. They interrupted their program. Meanwhile, it turned out that and by then he was a corpse. And the idea was then to make up a story about how he died.
Okay.
And
change everything.
Yes. And so, unfortunately, there were too many people involved, and the truth came out.
So the family were able to bury him?
Yes. He was buried. It was a very big public burial. Tens of thousands of people.
Where?
Back in the Eastern Cape. He's buried in his village, in his township, of Ginsberg.
He's still there?
Yeah, he's still there. And Bishop Tutu was presiding over the ceremony. So
okay.
You can Google it. There's a public clip of the funeral and everything else. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's... So, yes, so now we voted. Come 1994. Everybody has a right to vote. And your father is not there.
Yes.
And he fought for that.
Yes.
Before I proceed, how did you feel about it?
Look, I think let's have some context. about why we voted in 1994. I think it's an important thing to get that context. The apartheid government chose that time because they had killed, captured all of the leaders, and they were in a position to then choose who's going to be in power. So they basically, people like Sobukwe, who they thought were problematic, they'd killed. They'd killed people like my father, many other people along the way. Not coincidence, they only killed the really radical people. The others might have been killed along the way, but those that were radical and those that were really unapologetic about the type of freedom that they wanted, they didn't want those people to be in government by the time there was a black government. So they picked their opposition, you can say. Okay? And
of what was happening
of what
that
was
time.
happening there. They took people like Mamwini and they delegitimized them. And they told us stories, some of which might be true, some of which might not, but they created a pretext for why people like that shouldn't be leaders. And there were many, not just her. Then the last person they killed was Ubabu Chris Hani. Somehow he had come through the cracks and they realized that this guy is a problem. If you remember, prior to 94, Chris Hani was the most popular politician after Mandela, scientifically.
Yes.
Every time he stood for a position, he swept it.
Yes.
And in fact, he was supposed to be the vice president, if nature had been allowed to take its course. But between 91, in fact, even earlier, from when they started talking to Mandela in jail and until 94, they were negotiating with various of our leaders.
Yeah.
And each one of those negotiations was an opportunity for them to learn people's opinions. Are you believing that we can work together? Can we live together?
Okay.
Do you understand? So by the time 94 came, only those people that were prescribing to, we are going to live together in one country, those were the people that were available to lead. Because the others...
accepting the clause and everything.
I tell the story that if my children are kidnapped, I'm just using an example. If my children are kidnapped and there's somebody who's got a gun to their heads, and I'm in the room next door, at some point you have to be pragmatic and say, okay, let's talk. You can't
kill my child.
say, no, just kill them.
Yes.
And so the people they were negotiating with, I'm not saying those people did something wrong, but they forced those people to put themselves in a position where they talked.
Yes.
Because if they didn't negotiate, they were going to kill more of us. And of course, people like O.R. Tambo, people like Madiba regarded us as their children. That's why I use that example.
Yeah, I get you.
And these people are not close to us. So one was in jail. The other one was in Lusaka or in London, depending on which day it was. And you're talking to people that don't know exactly what's happening on the ground and what are the consequences if I say no to this thing. Are they going to kill more people? Do you understand?
I get you.
So we didn't negotiate freely.
Ish.
As a result, we didn't get a free and fair outcome. Do you understand?
I get you.
So, and we didn't win liberation in the way that we would have if this armed struggle had been allowed to play its course. And of course, it would have been messy. We would have had millions of people dying because these people were willing to do anything.
Yes, they are not budging.
Yeah, so I don't blame our leaders necessarily for the negotiation. I'm just bringing the context that they were not in a position to negotiate a fair deal.
Yeah.
So as a result, what we got in 1994 was a compromise of a compromise of a compromise of a compromise.
Until.
The
minimal.
They picked the people who they were negotiating with. They created the context for these negotiations. And out of that came a set of agreements with what they call the sunset clauses, which were these clauses that allowed them to continue controlling South Africa until now.
With what we're seeing currently.
So there's nothing that's surprising about where we are right now. If you had to read articles during those times, many African leaders from outside of South Africa read our stuff and said, hey, this thing is not going to end well. You guys don't have a country. These people still control the country.
It's just
They're picking.
fallacy.
Yes. So that's the context under which 94 happened. And of course, we were tired. The 80s,
they were tired as
we
well.
were tired, they were tired. But
Yes.
the 80s were the worst period in our history.
Yes.
They killed, I mean, every single violent action was on the table. They were giving people AIDS, if you remember. They were killing people on this side. On this side, people were disappearing. I mean, lots of things were happening, and so we were traumatized. On their side, the only reason why they talked to us was because communism finished. And the Soviet Union was defeated in negotiations in the late 80s. The Berlin Wall fell. So the people that were propping up apartheid state were the US, Israel, and the UK. So because communism was gone now, they had no reason to try and prevent communists running this country, because communism was not really an ideology that was available to people anymore. Do you understand? That's why 1994 happened. It wasn't because they wanted to, because then sanctions came, and now all of a sudden your friends that were funding you are telling you you're a bad person. So that's when we started seeing the UK and the US against apartheid. Only right at the end.
Surrender.
Yes. So then they forced these guys to negotiate, but they created the context under which they could negotiate the best deal possible for white people. That's what they were interested in, not for us. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So we vote, Madiba becomes president, and I was lucky for the 9 years before 94, I'd gotten to know President Madiba.
You were lucky, hey?
Yeah.
I wish I was there.
Yeah, so we spent quite a bit of time with him, even when he was in prison at Victor Verster.
Wow.
And, so this man is an old man. He's coming out of jail with arthritis. And
He's
this and
finished.
This. And he's having to lead a society that he's seeing for the first time in 2 decades or 3 decades.
Yes.
So him and President Mbeki did the best job they could, I guess, in trying to work within the system.
Under those circumstances.
But I believe they made some big mistakes, because the power of the presidency in South Africa is a lot more than is kind of publicly perceived. President is very powerful. And if they'd exercised certain powers early, we wouldn't have many of the problems we've got now. So for instance, the system to reclaim land, it's already there, the basic system in the Constitution. You just have to interpret it one way or the other. If the president interprets it strongly, we'd have had a different result. Mm-hmm. As we speak now, black people have 4% of private-owned land. White people have something like 26 million hectares in our country. And they will not give 1 inch. And what you see happening now with Trump entering the debates about how we redress the land issue, it's a preventative action, because people like the DA are seeing that the country is becoming more radical. And the future leaders will be more radical. So let's fight now
As
while
early
we
as
still
possible.
have people that we can engage with.
Yes.
That's why the GNU, and that's why these things are happening. It's not about liking people or not liking people and ideologies. It's about protecting what they've won and stolen. They won in 94, the debate and the negotiations, but they stole beforehand. So it's a combination of winning and stealing.
It was just you just do it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah. So I believe.
But they were done.
Yeah. So I believe, for instance, if you listen to how people like my father, people like Nelson Mandela in '64 during the trial, the Rivonia trial, and people like Robert Sobukwe were describing the South Africa they wanted, and people like Chris Hani even in the early '90s. That South Africa and this South Africa don't correspond. So, which tells us that the job is still there to do. We're not free. It's not yet Uhuru.
Wow. I haven't even asked him. I was still thinking, how am I going to ask this man?
Yes.
And he just gave me the answer.
Yes, yes.
Hlumelo.
And then the worst thing, sister, sorry to cut you off.
No problem.
Is that
you may proceed.
We carried on this education system that I was describing earlier, that was created during apartheid. So we didn't take that system and dismantle it. And there's a backstory for that. In 1994, and this I know because I was engaged in some of these discussions.
You?
Tangentially. My mother was actually supposed to be education minister after Bengu.
Yeah.
And in the course of that negotiation as to whether she was going to be or she was not, I was listening to some of the conversations between her and people. I won't say specifically.
Yeah.
But the debate was to find a way of accommodating teachers who came from homeland schools and rural schools and township schools into the general South African teaching population. And so we did the worst of both worlds. We took those teachers and brought them into the system. We said our teachers are just as good as the other teachers, so we don't have to focus on teachers training. So over time, teachers training colleges were shut down.
Yeah.
On the other side, we took those good apartheid-era teachers and gave them pensions. Then what do? They're going to go and set up private schools. And that's how the private school system moved from just a few missionary schools to many, many schools. So then you set a course where our children who didn't have the money to choose which schools to go, they were banished to going to schools which were teaching Bantu education in post-1994. In the way that Verwoerd would still want us to be taught, we're still being taught like that.
Yes,
Okay.
there was no change.
Now, it's unfair to say there was no change. I'm sure there were many, many schools where good principals got promoted and they found a way of creating an environment. And you'll see there are instances where in the worst of places you get the best of schools. But the majority of our kids were continuing to be taught as if they were taught under Verwoerd. And let me explain the numerical calculation. Every year, for instance, let's just choose 2026 next year, we are going to have about 1.3 million kids enter grade 1. Those 1.3 million kids that go into grade 1, you can forecast that 12 years later, right? Matric.
Yes.
When they get to the matric age, those children are going to have to suffer the consequences of only 100,000 of them becoming matric exemption candidates.
Yes.
Do you understand? So it means of that 1.1 million have been undereducated, or badly educated, or dropped out. So that's our system that we've got at the moment. Okay? And to show you that that's not a coincidence, there are only 210,000 places at total universities of South Africa. We've got 27 universities.
Yes. 27.
So 220,000 of the 1.2 million are the maximum expected to be able to qualify, which means people know that the rest of them are not going to make it, which means this thing is not a coincidence. Do you understand that?
It was a setup.
It was a setup, and we've somehow perpetuated the setup. And that's where the part becomes about us now and not longer about white people. Somewhere around 94, our people that are in power realize that the more educated people are not voting for the ANC. This is over time.
Yeah.
So I think I saw a statistic that says if you have matric, you are 60% likely to not vote for the movement. If you have a university degree, you're 80% likely. So it became a situation where it doesn't suit people to create clever blacks. And this now means that 1994, we have slowly but surely become the people that are controlling an education system and haven't transformed it because it doesn't suit us to transform it. Do you understand? That's the part that we don't want to talk about.
We
And
really don't want to talk about it.
in reality,
Middle class people, where are they?
yes. In reality, the chances of people being unemployed, if they've got a good education, are actually very low. But as time goes on, the system at university level has begun to doubt the quality of people coming in. So people are actually getting retested when they get to university and technical.
Aptitude test.
Aptitude test, because the system is now saying
Yes.
it's rotten down there.
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes.
So 325,000 students are fighting for these 210,000 positions, and only 100,000 coming from the public sector school system.
Yeah.
The balance is coming from others. Now that tells us we've got a problem. And just so people know, I'm not just talking. In 2013, I started a school myself. We picked a place called Tsakani because we wanted to try out something, which is this belief I told you about, which is talent has nothing to do with where you're from. The kids in Tsakani
You're born with the talent.
are just as likely to be clever as the children in Senton.
Yes.
So we sought to prove this in reality. So we didn't want to do certain things. We didn't want to be outside of the township. We didn't want to pick clever kids. We just wanted to pick the average, whoever comes. So the average person that needs a school, we would take them through a test for whether they can work well with people. That's all that we're focused on. Are you...
Ability.
Yeah. And are you able to discipline and put your nose down and work hard? That's all we're testing for. Then we had two other theories. One, if you tell kids that they can be anything they want to be, they will.
Yeah.
That was our theory. The second theory was that if you create an environment where a lot of it is about them teaching each other, not a teacher shouting at them, they'll actually learn more. So our system is actually based on peer-to-peer learning, and the teacher becomes a facilitator of that. As
Not a teacher to shout at them.
Not a teacher.
That's how we got our education.
Exactly right.
It was the opposite. Instead of them teaching us,
Yes.
Bapete, the so-called, that what is that stick?
Yeah.
A cane.
A cane.
A cane. A cane ingena.
So the cane thing is from Afrikaners. They come from that structure of discipline and non-conformance is resulting in you being beaten. Because they were trying to produce somebody that was docile. Whereas Tina, as black people, education is interactive. That's how it was supposed to be. Even now, nomkulu, mauhle nomkulu, it's not that you say this, they hit you. No, they engage.
Yeah.
That's how we used to teach each other. Ngobuntu. Ne?
Exactly. Thank you.
So, Isintu says that's how learning happens. It's through interaction. And interaction as peers, and then guidance from the elders. So that's what we created in the school. It's called an African Schools for Excellence. And from when that school started, 2013, until now, we've got 100% pass rate, 50%.
That's your.
Yeah, 50% of the kids or more get
Qualified.
university exemptions.
Yeah.
Just to give you a sense, in Tsakani, 6% are getting university exemptions. These are the same kids. So
that were regarded as...
Yeah, ours are getting 50% of ours are getting university exemption.
Yeah.
Outside of our school, the same township, 6%.
They get the same.
In the country, the average is around 8.5%. So our system doesn't work. Our education system is the actual thing that's holding our country back, right? Because remember I told you, the apartheid system focused on education, and they gave white kids 4 times the resources that they gave us. So we needed to do the same in 94 to catch up. It's logic. We needed to put more resources. We didn't.
We didn't.
Because we didn't, then the average teacher is learning and teaching within an environment that is uninspiring. That's why you've got a lot of alcoholism with teachers. My uncles were teachers, and I've learned the pain of that environment where it's not an environment of excellence. Abantwana badelela ama teacher, there's abuse. All of this because there's some physiological feeling that this is not right. The whole environment isn't right.
But it's not Ubuntu.
No. But the teaching experience is an embodiment of how we have lost our soul.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking about.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying Ubuntu.
Yes. So isintu sethu is lost. Look, we teach Cambridge curriculum.
AEB.
You go and look at how they teach history. Where do they start? Van Riebeeck. So from the first day that you as a black child learn history, you learn you were defeated in 16-something by some guy who happens to be better than you for whatever reason. From day one. So you come from home where your parents were the heroes to school where you were told your parents' ancestors were stupid. They were kafirs, they were non-believers, they were stupid, and that's why white people came here and helped them. So how can you, under that environment, become a confident student? You can't.
Find yourself.
Yes. I've been saying to my colleagues that are in government, we have to change the curriculum. These things we were talking about historically, that's where we must start. We must start back when the Kweklam people were the most prominent people in the world, creating civilization, writing the Bible, teaching people farming. This is where we must start. That's where the origin of humanity starts with us and our ability to teach civilization. I can tell you chapter and verse, Chinese people, Japanese people, these were educated by us. It's in my book exactly how it happened. I've documented it with, and it's not just me. There's many people that talk about it, but it's not something that we will ever teach. It's not something that's encouraged to speak about, and it's not something that we understand.
Why is not encouraged?
Because to become successful in South Africa, modern day South Africa, you have to appease white people. If you're on a board in South Africa, modern day South Africa, you can't rattle the cage, because if you rattle the cage, now you're making it uncomfortable for Koos van Toner. Koos van Toner then tells his friend, this guy, I thought he was a real good guy. Now he's
actually
radicalized, and then you get kicked off boards. So over time, people learn to shut their mouth because it doesn't pay to be vocal. In every aspect of society, in politics, it's like that. In business, it's like that. And teaching is like that.
You forgot one.
Yes.
Middle class.
But the middle class is what I'm describing as the people that have to keep quiet to keep the bank account.
Yes.
So to be middle class in South Africa, you either have to be very lucky to have built your own business or found a business or inherited a business or something, or to be on this side where you are conformist to the type of society that Koos wants to create for you. And that starts at school. You get told at school that, jumping outside the box is not comfortable, and if you get to be an accountant and you get to be a lawyer, you have to play by certain rules. You want to be a politician, you have to play by certain rules. And this is all a behavior to try and create a type of black person that white people are willing to deal with, which is what black consciousness was fighting from day one. So we are still in that environment. So they stopped us from teaching black consciousness. We allowed them to stop us, and we perpetuated it. We then get this situation now where years and years and years, 30 years after democracy, we are in a place where our system doesn't feel like home. We are visitors in our own home, right? And so what is equality and what is, the new South Africa is really about conforming or being out of the system. So it's not that different from banishing and getting killed. It's the same. You get banished out of the economy.
Exactly.
That's why
the middle class are quiet.
Yes. They have to be quiet. Mm. And then this thing of creating BEE backfired on us, because in order to be okay with the politicians, you can't criticize them.
In order to
be okay with the white people, you can't criticize them. So now you're passive.
Equation is balanced.
That's right. And what does that lead to? It leads to the status quo staying where it is. So you can now have the illusion of power, whether it's corporate power or political power, but you don't have the actual power, because what is power? Power is the ability to affect change. If you're not affecting change, what are you doing? You're perpetuating the system, the current reality.
You push it.
Yes, and so that's why they even stopped talking about what percentage of land black people own and what percentage of wealth black people have, because every year it's hardly changing. And if it's changing in such small quantities that it doesn't make a big difference in the country. And when it does change, it's actually creating another thing, which is a small middle class against a very big poor population. And the way we've chosen to address that is through grants. And what do grants do? They pacify you. So you've got a middle class that's pacified by money that they get.
Yes.
You've got poor people who are pacified by grants. And the reality then becomes, it doesn't pay to change things. Do you understand?
It's not.
So transformation requires us to take some pride in re-injecting Isintu into our society. And by that I mean we have to make everybody in South Africa understand that to live here you have to emphasize the Africa over the South. We are South Africa, it's a geography, but we are African before anything else.
And
yet we teach as if we happen to live in this special type of Africa where being African is not that important.
You know that there's a conflict or something is burning there.
Yes.
Regarding Pan-Africanism and...
Yes. So that's why people like my father, people like Sobuko were saying, let's call this thing Azania. Let's create a name from the beginning that speaks to different than what it is right now. Because to keep a brand, and then say you're going to do everything different from that brand, it doesn't work. Over time, the thing that you are promoting becomes lost in what you're trying to keep. Do you understand?
Yes.
And that's where the conflict comes from. And if you look at my earlier description about how we're made into smaller and smaller tribes from a big collection of a single unit of people, the same happened with Africa. I want to tell you a little bit about that story because you talk about Pan-Africanism. Africa is what it is because of this famous thing called the Berlin Conference, 1884, I think, when the conference was. The conference took place not because, again, just like apartheid, it's not because white people hate us and they decided they need to deal with us. No.
They just wanted things.
4 years before this conference, there's a German historian that produced a report about that society I told you we created up in Northeast Africa,
yes,
which included this place called Egypt, right?
Yes.
The report was produced after this guy lived in Egypt for 30 years. They sent him there to go and investigate. So what was this society all about? Where did these people come from? Whatever. The guy comes back and says, gents, everything we know comes from these guys. I read the thing. It's available if you knew what to look for. Okay? So this guy writes a report. He spent 30 years. He's an expert. He knows the place. He says these people have created the height of civilization in this place called Egypt. It was called Kemet in the old days. And so his report was to say, I think there were some white people that taught them these things. Give me some money and bring me some people to go and do some digging. This report was 1880. So they do. The Americans put money, the UK put money, and they send anthropologists and archaeologists to go and investigate. Mm-hmm. Who are these white people that taught these black people these things that then they taught us?
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes.
Because we can't think it's them.
Yeah, no,
it's got to be there was somebody.
It's impossible.
There was a course version
yes.
there before. So they go and look for course, and they find us. Never report what they found. They then call for a conference in Berlin.
Wow.
And what does this conference decide? We have to divide them, all of them, before they find out that they've created Christianity, they've created Judaism, before all of those things. Let us divide them. Let us call them different countries. So 50 countries were created. Each country was given a master. Namibia, Germany, all of that stuff. So now, the job of these masters was to supervise the way we learn, to supervise how we talk in terms of language, to supervise the type of way that we learn the Bible. And the inherent thing that they were teaching us is to think about ourselves as tribes, smaller and smaller tribes, so we get further and further away from seeing ourselves the way we were, which is one continent and one people. Because if we're one people, we're too many, too big.
Yeah.
So we've got
Africa
to be
is big.
micromanaged. That's why we had the Billion Conference. It just so happened that, like everything else, there's a financial consequence to it, which is each country, every gold you find is yours, and every oil you find is yours. So that's how it got paid for. But the conference was an outcome of knowing where we come from and making sure we don't know for as long as possible. And they were very successful.
Wow.
That's why Pan-Africanism is so difficult to get going, because now we've inherited a reflex of thinking about ourselves in these small contexts. That's actually now our thing. Yes. Yes.
And border gates.
Meanwhile, when you look at our culture, isintu, it's one culture.
Yeah.
We don't have cultures. There's no plural to isintu. Because anything in our vernacular that starts with E, it's one. Not amasintu, there's no such word. So we're one culture, one people, right? And we practice a spiritual belief system called Ubuntu, which I explained to you. It's people of the spirit.
Yes.
But the deeper thing is we've always believed that we are a small part of God living in a human form.
Exactly.
That is us.
Yes.
That's why Ubuntu then speaks to how you deal with other small parts of God that are in the human form. And when you look at our culture, you see into the words, like for there's Muntu, human form.
Yes.
There's Kintu, which is animals and trees.
Oh, yeah.
But the word Ntu is behind all of it because it's
Dominant.
God in different forms.
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes, yes.
So the thing of creating this way of dealing with each other is, at the base of it, is to acknowledge that we are all little pieces of divine creation. And you have to treat this
Each
thing
other.
sacredly.
Yeah.
Which is why you can't walk past a person and not say hi. Because you have to figure out what's your experience? Yes.
Who are you? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And you ukhuluma iqiniso, abomkhulu bethu
Yes.
abasaphila.
Yes.
Mawungaya kuye like greeting him,
Yes.
uzokubuza ukuthi who is your umkhulu wakho? Bebahlala kudala.
Yes.
And try to find the link
Yes.
between ukuthi ngiyabazi noma
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. And this thing of clan names was to make that easier, the link. Oh, Hlumelo, okay. Oh, Hlumelo kanene. Then the whole story starts.
Yes.
But it wasn't a way of saying you're different from me. But the way that we got taught about tribes, and our current education system teaches like we're different from the beginning. And though we think, so we get to, over time, think smaller and smaller and smaller. And we move further from Isintu to what we are now. So to me, the creation of the South Africa we want to create has 4 pillars. Number 1, the whole thing, Isintu Sobuntu, needs to become the central thing for all of us. The culture of Ubuntu needs to be everything. But not in this diluted form. Doesn't mean I'm a person, therefore you're a person. That's not what our ancestors were trying to communicate. They were trying to say, you, Susan, are divine.
Yes.
So treat yourself that way, treat others that way. Don't treat yourself like you're not. Do you understand?
Yes.
It's a reminder of who you are in the highest form, right? So when we say Isintu is about living that understanding, about living that identity, right? Once you do that, then you have to ask yourself, what type of society does a divine person create? Not this. Ne? So a divine person looks to create a society that's roughly enabling of equality. Abelungu, they hate this word equality. because they associate equality with mediocrity. Those two things don't exist next to each other. If you strive to equate a society that has almost everybody's in the middle,
Right.
then what you do out of that society is you lessen crime, you lessen all of these things that are making it difficult for us to move.
Yes.
You lessen the urge of people to drink and to drown their sorrows because they feel like they've been left behind.
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes.
And for me, if that means sacrificing this top rich structure, so be it. Why? I mean, there can be people that do well because they're helping the whole of society. No problem with that. No problem with it. But you can't do well at the expense of society. And that's what we've got now. The rich class is the master class. So we're back to, feudalism, where 20, 30 people control the whole economy. And
20, 30.
Maybe 20 or 30 top people. And
Yes.
then the 200,000 people that are managers of those people
I'm
are the
checking
middle
the
class.
ratio while you're speaking.
And then below that, it's the rest. That's what's happening amongst black society right now. Right? And so I think that we've got to really look at ourselves and say, can we get the type of society we want by replicating the society we found before 94? And we can't.
Do you think it's too late?
No, we can't create the type of society we want by replicating the 1994 society. We can't. We have to change
The
the model.
1994.
Yes, and break that society into a different type of society that creates more equal results. And that means we have to transform everything, starting with what we teach at school, how much money we spend on education, and where that money goes. Because it's not necessarily just about the amount. We spend about 30,000 per child on education in this country. But I'm telling you, of that 30,000, a large amount goes to people that are middle people. So by the time it gets to the child, they're not receiving 30,000 a year worth of education. They're receiving a much smaller fraction. People are making school lunch a business.
Yes.
They take money for school lunch and they give children peanut butter and jam sandwiches and keep the profit.
Yes.
That's where our education money is going. So we haven't actually done fundamental things like rebudget. You know, our budgets have just been rolling from one term to the next term. We haven't start from scratch and say, if we had to choose.
How can you rebudget while you don't know what you want?
Or while you're chowing.
Yes.
Both things are
Exactly.
happening. So you have to start fundamentally from scratch. So if our national budget is something around 1.8 to 2.2 trillion, that's how much our national budget is. How can we use that money differently to create the society we want? We have to start there. That's what any family does. You look at your salary and you say, my salary is this, your salary is that. Masiti, Banisa, how do we restructure for our house? We don't just keep going,
Yes.
which is what we've done. So when we talk about transformation, real transformation, we start there with how do we spend our money?
So you're saying, you mean 1994? Scrap it.
No, I'm saying that it was a war we lost. We have to accept that we lost.
Okay.
Let's not look at it as a victory. We lost. We got tricked.
Okay.
And in my first book that I wrote, I have a chapter there called The Great Fraud, and that's how I described 1994. It was a fraudulent outcome.
Yes, I used to say to my friends, sometimes we need to just stop everything and start from scratch.
And just
accounting
agree.
Accounting 101.
Exactly. Start from scratch, rebudget, and say this same money that we've got as a national budget, how do we reuse it to create a society that has Isintu Sobuntu as the central thing that it's trying to do? The other people must adjust to that result, not the other way around.
Yes.
At the moment, we are saying, how do we create a society that makes white people comfortable to live here? That's not how you don't invite somebody to your house and then say to yourself, so how do I change everything here so that my guest is comfortable?
No.
It doesn't work like
no.
that. You explain to your guest, this is how we live here.
Yes.
We value this, we value that, The way we do groceries is because our kids like this. Or that. Let's engage. Now, you like something, okay, fine, I'll add it to my list.
Yes.
But I'm not throwing my things away because you like it. You
Yes,
understand?
because you're the guest.
You're a guest. And until South Africans understand that, starting with where we started, the original South Africans are Kwekam people, which is every single type of black person. That's the original South African.
Wow.
Everybody else that has come for different reasons, and they are welcome in this country as long as the country is moving towards Isintu Sobuntu. We're not changing from that.
Okay, we are left with 10 minutes.
Okay.
We're actually run over time.
That's my producer.
Let's try.
We can conclude.
Yes.
10 minutes just to conclude and wrap up with
No problem.
the lines that are important. But we've covered almost everything.
Yes. This is a podcast called Are We Yet Uhuru? We're still having our very important guest from Cape Town, maybe from all around the world. Mr. Hlumelo Biko, aka Steve Biko. He continued after 1994. Sizwile, sifundile. But I don't see you in politics.
Yeah, I think we have to pick where we want to change things. And so far, my decisions have always been about what's my personality, what am I good at, what's around me that I can try and create some change. And also, I'm 47 years old. I have been raising a family and trying to do all of those things. So that's really have been my focus. I think now I'm ready to get into activism of teaching people and through engagements like this, of engaging with people that are in power. If you want to call that politics, then that's politics. Of engaging with those people that are in business.
Remember the rules of the podcast?
And pushing for transformation. And that's also political. The business environment in South Africa is political. And but more than anything, I want to be involved on the ground with helping people.
Wow.
And so my work, that African Schools for Excellence I told you about,
Yes.
we're now growing it. So we're moving from 1 school to 5 schools. And our
Already?
hope, yes. In the next 2 years, we'll have 5.
Different name or one name?
Same name, yeah. In
What's
different
it-
parts of the
Do you
country.
mind to tell South Africans the name of the school?
It's called African Schools for Excellence, ASE.
Wow.
Yes.
So they can find it on the internet
You
and
can
look
find
at
it on the internet, and it's going to slowly grow and become a household name one day. And in those schools, we'll hope to teach the right way and to transform the experience of learning.
So is it a college from
No,
grade?
it is a primary and high school.
It's from grade
One.
1 until
All the way.
grade 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
in the classy way they said it's a college.
that's right.
They
that's
say
right.
it's a college.
That's right.
And the curriculum,
Yeah, the curriculum. What you mentioned Cambridge? Am I correct?
Well, that's what everybody is using because that's what you have to teach towards in this country. You know, it's a Cambridge or a version of a Cambridge. What we've done is we've made it more practical to the local situation. I'll teach you, for example, how we teach history. We start, if we want to teach about apartheid, and you are in Soweto, and we'd say there was a gentleman that lived on Robert Sobukwe Road, number 46.
The road we're talking about.
No, just making an example.
Okay.
And that gentleman was captured in a certain place and disappeared. His first name was Robert. We don't know anything more about him. Can you go and find out? Then the kids, and this is in their neighborhood, then the kids want to know, okay, this address, I know this address.
Wow.
So on their way home, they go and look, and then they start to do their research. Then the next day, they come with different stories that they've heard about this person.
Wow.
And once they're filling out those stories, through those stories, that's how we teach them about apartheid. We make it local.
So you are teaching. It's the university curriculum, the way.
The way, yes. But that's how education was supposed to be.
Yes, you are preparing them to go to the next step like
Correct.
very quickly.
Correct. So we focus on
Wow.
problem solving. We focus on
Troubleshooting.
but also the discipline of not knowing and admitting, I don't know. Because I don't know doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means you don't know.
Yeah,
So
you
then
are not informed about that.
We talk about how to find out more. So then the other guys say, hey, I heard this, and this one says I heard this, and then Kukom Kulu, who knows this.
Yes.
Then the people go out, and that's how education is supposed to be. And I think that essence is what we want to bring to South Africa, which is to disaggregate this thing of where you live and what type of education you get. You should get the best education regardless of where you live.
You know, since I started this podcast, my song, he knows, it's education. I always say, I wish I can have like an opportunity to talk to the minister of education. Can't he relook at our curriculum?
Yes.
It's my like song, and it's my cry every day. So I'm so happy that I find someone who is in that level and seeing that South Africans need some change in the Department of Education.
So we're also starting a Biko Coding Academy.
Wow.
Because the world is moving from just university.
For IR.
It's moving into AI and all of these things, but the root of it is coding. Coding is just a language, right? And so that language you can learn from scratch in 6 months. And so we are starting with 6 months boot camps for students who have no background in this thing and want to get into the workforce. And some of them are going to do really well out of it because the coding jobs pay. And the reason why we are not in coding is because we don't have access to learning the language.
So
we want to create as many coding academies as possible in South Africa so that people that have failed to qualify for university, it's not the end of life. You can move into this thing 6 months later. They're earning minimum 30,000 rands a month.
Yes.
So if everybody has access to coding schools, then it starts to open up the opportunity. So these are the initiatives I want to spend the rest of my life working on. And wherever that takes me, I'm going there.
So you are compromising Steve Biko now?
I'm
Steve
not
Biko
compromising.
legacy.
No. I'm trying to live it out. And I think everybody does what they can in their own environment.
Yeah, it's you.
I've been very lucky to be here.
You are not Steve Biko. Yes.
I've been very lucky to be here and to have the experiences that have brought me here.
Yes.
And now I'm trying to make sure that I can help as many people, but also for them to teach me, because it's all, I come here and I'm learning from you and you learning from me, and we move on and we're better people after this.
So tell me, everything is Steve Biko. Were you there?
What do you mean?
Hospitals, streets, stadium, whatever.
You know, that was hard fought for. And I really want to give a shout out to my oldest brother, Nkosinathi Biko. From 94 till about 2000, that name Steve Biko wasn't the same, because he wasn't anywhere in history that fitted with the narrative of 94. So it took a long time for people to begin to put him in the group of leaders that are there to be celebrated. And my brother has fought hard for that to start. And obviously now, once people learn more, the natural thing is you want to celebrate somebody that's a hero. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the name is
definitely he was a hero.
Isintu Sobuntu teaches you to celebrate somebody, you say their name.
Yes.
Because that's how you bring them back to life, through the name.
Yeah.
That's why in Spedi Rareta.
Yeah.
Siatinta.
Yes.
Because what we're doing is for a brief moment, we're taking this person's spirit and we're bringing it back into what we're doing now. So every time I see something that's named after my father, for that moment, that's bringing him back to life.
Nice.
And that's what we should all do with all the heroes that are representing Isintu Sobuntu.
Wow.
I've written 5 books.
Yes.
The first one was when I was 30 years old. As I said, now I'm 47.
Wow.
And that book was called The Great African Society. And I was talking about the country we could have. And so that book is available at Exclusive Books, or you can order it online, Amazon and these other places. And then after that, I then wrote a book called Africa Reimagined. And there I was talking more about the Pan-African and how we can bring Pan-Africanism back. And again, that book is available either at Exclusive Books or Amazon or online retailers. And I was getting a lot of questions about my father and my mother and the background, so I decided to write a book called Black Consciousness, A Love Story. And I used their story from when they met to when my father died and when I was born to tell the story of Black consciousness, but in a positive framework so that people can have access. And I interviewed all of the people that are still alive that were leaders in that time, as many as I could find. And that was the outcome of the book. And of late, the last two books are more about spirituality because I got to the sense that this is the issue. So I wrote a book called The God in Us, which was published by UNISA. And that book is available online and you can order it. And the last book that I've written, which hasn't been published yet, which will be published in 2 or 3 months, it's called Eternal Consciousness.
Okay.
So those are my...
the easiest way to find your book to South Africans?
Easiest way to find these books is online.
Online. How?
You have to Google my name.
Okay.
And it will list the books and you click on the book that you're interested in.
Oh, okay.
And I'm creating a bookstore for myself with all of my books in a bookstore. So when you Google my name, you should, in the next couple of months, create a pop-up with all of the books in there.
You're not selling them?
The website will be selling them.
Oh, the website is
That's
selling
right.
them online.
That's right. That's
okay. Babukele Makhaya Nizizwele, he's the author. He has books. The books are very interesting. You can find them online. Just search using his name, Hlumelo Biko. The book will be listed there, and you choose the book you want, and you buy them online. Mr. Hlumelo,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you for
being
having me.
our guest.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Can you vayelisa ababukeli bethu emakhaya?
Emakaya, Tianibongela for spending time listening to this wonderful conversation. I am looking forward to talking to you more. I'm going to start giving more of these type of engagements, and everything that you do should be driven by Isintu Sobuntu.
Thank you. Abugeli, South Africans, this is the podcast called Are We Yet Uhuru? #imbuzingabuzekiko, the voice of the voiceless. Sintshelile sathi sizonilethela zona, niyabona siyakwenza. We keep the promises. Our episode iphelela la. Don't forget our brand, Ijuan Kobe, that's sponsoring this podcast. We have a cranberry gin and tonic and sparkling wine, Nectar Rosé. You find it on www.ijuanopkobe.co.za, or you'll find it at Macro online. They deliver it in your doors. Thank you very much for watching us today. Salute.